Starting off at number 10 now, we have the Grand Dragon. This one comes from Betamax V2, who said, a great uncle of mine passed away when I was a little boy. The family met at his house after the funeral to start packing things up and all, as he had no children and his wife died many years before him. My great uncle was a highly respected member of his small town. He was a banker of some sort, deacon in the church, and all those things that made him a good person. Well, tucked away in the attic, not covered by any dust mind you, was a large wooden trunk. Inside this trunk were the purple robes of a KKK Grand Dragon, various member listings, meeting notes, and all other sorts of things related to the KKK. Turns out that my great uncle was a very active, although very much secretive, member of the regional chapter of the KKK. Okay, I think we've already started up here with this video. Can you guys even imagine finding out that your relative, someone who was respected and loved by his family and friends, was a member of the KKK? Probably the most famous white supremacy group of all time. I guess you'd have a lot of questions after that, especially for your family. Like, how didn't they know? Moving on to number 9 now, we have the milk. This one comes from Kleinboy, 1987. Now he said, my great grandfather hit his wife with a fire poker and slit her throat. He then proceeded to blow his head apart with a shotgun. He sat down in a rocking chair and used his cane to push the trigger, all over an argument of whether it was too cold for me to walk to the grocery store to get some milk. That's it. That's the whole story. That's everything. There's nothing more to help us try and wrap our heads around what happened here. The couple were arguing over whether this storyteller would be alright getting milk due to the cold, and he murdered her over it and then killed himself. Now I'm guessing by the fact that they're referred to as great-grandparents that they were pretty old when this happened. What would cause someone who's been in a marriage for decades and decades to just suddenly snap like that? I think there's more to this story, but honestly, I'm not even sure I want to know. At the number 8 spot now, we have Dog Heaven. This story comes from New Orpheus about his wife. He said, my wife and I were reminiscing about our childhood pets one day. When I shared how hard it was when my cherished dog had to be put down, she got to thinking. All of her childhood dogs were killed by semis. Now normally the thought of a dog getting loose and being run over by a semi-truck isn't that far-fetched. However, it had just clicked with her that her childhood home was in the countryside, down a long gravel road. The nearest highway was really far away. She decided that the next time she talked to her dad, she would find out what really happened. After all, now she is an adult and can handle the truth that a 7-year-old couldn't. Well, her dad just sort of smiled at her and said, oh honey, I never lied to you. Your childhood dogs were indeed hit by a semi-automatic. Yeah, a semi-automatic rifle. Now, to be fair here, it sounds like her dad was putting down the dogs when they were old or very sick instead of taking them to the vet to do it. I hear that's more common in certain rural communities around the world. I'm passing no judgment here. I just thought it would be a shocking story because she genuinely thought they were all getting hit by semis, as in semi-trucks, when it was actually semi-automatic rifles. There's quite a big difference between those two things. Next up at number 7 now, guys, we have the judge. This one comes from Thing, who said, the real reason my aunt moved back to my hometown was she was briefly kidnapped by some bad guys she displeased in her work as a judge. The guy held her at gunpoint and told her she could either leave town in the next 24 hours or be taken back in. I was like 8 at the time, so everyone just told me she moved back because she missed us all. I found out about it when my brother and I were rehashing old stuff 10 years later. Now I'm sure all the adults in this family had mixed feelings about the auntie returning. Yay, auntie's back in town for good because she misses us, but oh no, it's actually because she was told to leave at gunpoint where she worked as a judge. That's really scary. It's also kind of scary to think that some criminals can subvert justice like that. Maybe you guys think this is exceptionally rare though. I hope it is. Moving on to number 6 now, guys, we have the other child. This one comes from Egg Coroner, who said, I just found out that my grandparents wanted more kids but were having trouble getting pregnant for a second time. They adopted a toddler-aged brother and sister when my mother was 7. Soon after, my grandmother got pregnant. The girl then died from a very mysterious fall down the stairs and the boy was quietly given to another family. They never ever spoke of either child from that day forward. I thought she was pulling my leg, but a quick search turned up the girl's death record. I was never close to that grandmother and can't help but think back to every weird aspect of that woman and all the strange relationships she had with her family. Wow. that one is really crazy. I think what the storyteller is trying to suggest is that when the couple finally did get pregnant, they then didn't want their adopted children anymore, and so they staged a fatal accident for the girl and just sent the boy away forever. That is really dark. I presume that it was their mother who told them this story, and they thought, there's no way that's true, you must be pulling my leg. But yeah, I don't know, man, I've never heard a good joke that sounds anything like this. Coming in number 5 now, we have the photos. Conte Vincero said, we found a picture of 2 great aunts arm in arm with Hitler. We also found a signed photograph of Mussolini. Yeah, their great aunts were apparently best mates with Hitler. What an awful surprise to find out. I mean, the scary thing about this story is pretty clear. I guess the only positive to take away from it is that maybe their grandmother wasn't all chummy with Hitler. Maybe it was just 2 sisters. Clutching at straws here, I think. As for the signed picture of Mussolini, I think they should sell it and give the money to a nice charity. That's something that would have really annoyed him. At the number 4 spot now, we have life insurance. This one comes from Cotton Weasel, who said, I have a second cousin that murdered his siblings and parents for insurance money. He didn't get away with it, but only spent around 20 years in prison. He's out now, but no one talks about him or will speak to him. The only reason I even know is my parents warn me if he ever reaches out to me that I shouldn't talk to him. I managed to find out about him and what happened by Googling him. Unreal. I mean, for me personally, unless something awful has happened, there should never be a good reason to kill your parents and siblings. I actually can't think of any reason off the top of my head. That's pretty obvious for normal people, but to do it because of life insurance money, that's insane. I'm glad to hear that he got locked up, but yeah, I do think 20 years might not be enough for slaughtering a whole family in cold blood. Someone in the comments section of this story replied by saying, if he does contact you, the first thing you tell them is, I don't have any life insurance. That's some good but also quite dark humorous advice there. Moving on to the number 3 spot now, guys, we have the uncle. This one comes from Dogma3721, who said, an uncle I've never met, my mom's brother, killed my mom's parents when he was 16 in a fit of rage and burnt down their home in an attempt to cover it up. I've never met him, as he has been in jail on a life sentence since before I was born. I was only informed of his existence because my dad was blackmailing my mom with this. I mean, aside from it being scary, this story's just tragic. It's tragic enough to know that your grandparents were murdered and you never got to meet them, especially when you find out that it was your own uncle who did it. I bet it's even more horrifying for the storyteller's mum, especially now that the dad is apparently blackmailing her with this. I mean, that's a pretty scummy thing to do, as if she hasn't already been through enough in her life. Sorry, this is supposed to be a scary video, and now I'm just angrily ranting about things. At the number 2 spot now, we have the past life. This is just strange on every level. See if you can follow along with it. Someone on Reddit said, in 1976, my father was in the military and traveled to Guatemala after an earthquake. During the cleanup, he was at the Mayan site of Mixco Viejo. There were several burial sites overturned there. For some reason, unknown to me, he brought back the remains of a female Mayan Indian. He claimed to have loved her in a past life. These remains are still in the box in our attic. They are mostly dust now, with a part of the skull left. My father died in 1986, so I cannot ask him about it. My mother and sisters claimed her ghost followed them wherever they moved until my dad died. I am skeptical of that claim. I also have a half brother in Puerto Rico who is in his 30s that I will never meet. I only know his name is Ricky, and my dad had a fling with a Puerto Rican woman while stationed there in the army sometime in the 70s. Okay, breathe. There's a lot to break down there. I think taking the remains of a stranger from their homeland is very strange, as it is probably illegal too, but his family didn't even do anything when he came back with that. I know they said they didn't know, but now they do, and the remains are apparently still just sitting there in the attic. Weird. As for the last bit of the story, someone else pointed out that pop star Ricky Martin was born in Puerto Rico in the 1970s. Could it be him? And finally, number 1 now, we have Chucky. Disclaimer for this one, guys, this is pretty disturbing. Beastie J said, my mother told me a story about being at a small funeral in the late 1950s in East Texas. The deceased was mentally challenged and the family was relieved to have the child at peace. During the service, the coffin began to rock and crying was heard. Then she was taken outside and watched as the coffin was carried to the cemetery next to the church and hurriedly buried. I was telling my kids this story years later and my mother walked into the room, listened for a moment and asked, "Are you telling them about Uncle Chucky?" Okay, I honestly didn't even know whether or not to include this. I was back and forth for about 10 minutes. It's horrifying. I'm really hoping this story isn't actually real. I'm hoping it's very exaggerated, or maybe their mother was just messing around with them. This is really shocking stuff. Did this family really bury their mentally challenged son alive? Personally, I don't think so. I think even with the different attitudes of the 1950s, this is still the stuff of horror and fiction rather than real life and fact. I mean, it's my job to just present people's stories as they are told, but yeah, I want to hear if you guys think this one is legit.
Starting us off with number 10 is the truth. Now this one's from a girl on Reddit who said she was named after her great aunt who died in a motorcycle accident a few years before she was born. She was told not to talk about her to her great grandma because the loss was just too much to handle and relive again, which was fair enough. No one wants to relive the death of their daughter. Now when the user was 24 years old, her great grandma passed away, and after the wake her great uncle got drunk and just starts exposing everyone. Now in casual passing he mentioned the great aunt's suicide and the user was like, "Wait, what suicide? Grandma told me she had died in a motorcycle accident." And he replied saying, "Yeah, that was the cover story. She just didn't want to tell anyone the real reason she had to give a closed casket for her daughter's funeral." And at this point the whole truth and nothing but the truth had to be spilled because too much had already been said. Now apparently the great aunt was a lesbian in love with another girl from university and they had made a plan to be together without their parents' knowledge. Now when the user's great grandmother figured out the plans, she sent the great aunt halfway across the country in order to separate the two. But the girls had a contingency plan if this were to happen, and of course they knew it would. They made a suicide pact. The great grandma's homophobia had caused two innocent girls to kill themselves, but she admitted she never forgave herself for it and it haunted her till the day she died. The user was honestly shocked at all the lies she'd been told about the woman she was literally named after, and the fact that everyone just accepted this lie just because of the great grandma's shame. This whole story just pissed me off, but then again this whole list is gonna piss me off. Love is love! Love is love. Now coming in at number 9 is the boyfriend. This one actually broke my heart and was shared by a Reddit user. Now she said her grandma grew up in Costa Rica in the 40s and at the time her mother was dating a guy that just seemed off. The user's grandma and her sister hated him, but their mother insisted that he was a good guy and that he took care of them, so they kind of just shut up about it. But one night the guy decides that he's actually done being nice and ends up murdering the mother in her bed by beating her skull with a hammer. Blood is everywhere on the walls, the ceiling, soaking the mattress. Now the user's grandma and sister come home to the scene and their mum dead in bed and the boyfriend obviously nowhere to be found. They called the police who took the body away, did a cursory examination of the crime scene and then left. Can you just get this? The police left these two 12 and 9-year-old girls in a house where their mother had just been murdered. But the even worse part was that they only had one bed in the house, and that was the blood-soaked mattress, and if they threw that away they'd have to sleep on the floor. So they decided to just flip the mattress over, but then the user's grandma just ended up getting drenched in all the blood the mattress had soaked up. At number 8 we have who are the parents. Now this one also comes from a girl on Reddit who said when she was 21 her older sister confessed she had been raped by a stranger when she was 17 years old. The user was shocked that she hadn't been told this before since they came from a really big family and everyone just kind of knew everything. But then she got to thinking her older sister also happened to be 17 years older than her, and people always commented on how the siblings could be twins. And one time for a class the user was asking her mum questions about her birth story, but she just couldn't remember the answers for most of the questions, like who was in the room at the time, when was she born, she just didn't know. To make matters more complicated, the parents were very religious and would never have condoned an abortion, so the secret here is that the user is adamant that she is the product of her sister's rape and that her grandparents have been pretending to be her real parents this whole time. Can you just imagine if your sister was your real mum this whole time? The user actually never had the guts to ask her sister about it, since if it wasn't true then she just made this whole traumatic rape story about herself, which is just very narcissistic. Honestly, if that was me I would have to ask. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't ask, but then if it wasn't true I would just disown myself and just leave. Now filling our number 7 slot is the rage. Now this one's from Reddit user SarXNA, who shared that her great grandpa and grandma had 17 children together, which Wow, like what a different time it was, but even then, that's a lot of bloody kids. Either way, the user found out that one of the children ended up becoming pregnant during her teens, but it was because her father had raped her. Now when the mother found out, she was so angry and filled with rage, not at her husband for raping their daughter, no, that would be absurd. She was livid at her daughter, who she then pushed down the stairs, and so the daughter and baby both died. That's just shocking. Why would you get mad at your daughter because your husband raped her? Now at number 6 is the uncle. Honestly, I read a lot of stories for this video, and I feel like a running theme in all of them was just evil uncles, which is just weird because I feel like uncles are usually just always so fun and nice, but clearly they are not. Now this one's from Reddit user GarbageCat88, who said their great aunt fell into a current at Niagara Falls and then got swept over the falls and ended up dying. Now most people ruled it out as an accidental death, but everyone in their family begged to differ. They believed the great aunt was actually pushed into the water by her alcoholic, abusive husband. Now the user's grandma told them that way back in the day, domestic abuse was seen as taboo and shameful, and so the whole thing was just kind of swept under the rug until the husband got remarried. The great uncle was very quickly arrested after his second marriage for nearly beating his wife to death. Dude, what is your issue? Go to rehab, buy a punching bag, and if neither of those things solve your issues, then don't get married. Plain and simple. So this Reddit user said that as their granddad got older, the user and their mum would look after him. Now the grandpa had dementia, but he would share stories from his life, from the war, from his youth, and so forth. Now one day he started telling them about his wife. He had liked her from before he went off to fight during World War II, but never really acted on it since he was poor and didn't think he was worthy to marry her. Now that's why he even enlisted, because he wanted to become respectable, but while he was away, their grandma ended up getting married to someone her parents approved of. But her first husband was horrible. He'd beat her, verbally abuse her, and even make her sleep in the barn outside in the cold. Now the only reason she didn't divorce him is because it just wasn't the done thing at the time. It was looked down upon, as you guys probably know. But when the grandpa finally came back from war, he was told she was married, that he could go visit her, and so he did, just to say hello. Old flame, old fling, you know how it is. When he got there, he found her beaten and bloody and broken and took her to a doctor and convinced her to divorce the man and get out of that situation. She did, and then they got married a year later, but the ex-husband would continuously show up and harass her. Now the grandpa had always said the ex ended up moving away, but in a lucid moment recalling the story, he said this: "I hated him for what he'd done to her. I knew he'd never leave her alone. I made sure he'd never bother her or any woman again." So he basically just confessed to killing this man in the 40s in the Midwest, and not just that, he got away with it too. At number 4 is the video game break. Now when you've just been playing a PlayStation game for like 3 hours straight and you're just not getting anywhere, and you're like, you know what, okay, I can quickly pause this, get a drink, get a snack right about now, you know how it is. Now that's an expected video game break, whereas this one is the farthest thing from it. Now this one came from an anonymous person who said their grandma was watching them play video games when all of a sudden she made a startling confession. She shared that when she was super young, she snuck out of their house late at night, and a man who lived on her street ended up taking her to his basement and raping her. She ended up getting pregnant, and after she gave birth, her mum and doctor took the baby away and smothered it to death. And she didn't even have a choice in the matter. The person had no idea what to say to this unprovoked confession, so they just hugged her and apologized on many people's behalf, but their grandma had closed off again by then and just said she didn't want to talk about it anymore, she just had to get it off her chest. There's so many stories of this that I read, and I'm just like, my heart goes out to all these people that such horrible things happen to you guys. Now filling on number 3 slot is the disappearing act. This one kind of made me laugh a bit. Like, I know it's not funny, but this aunt is just on another level of that I just want to attain at one point in my life. So an anonymous person shared that they have an aunt that literally disappeared off the face of the earth. It was the 40s or 50s in Portland, and she was about 20 something at the time. But nothing was wrong. She didn't have a problematic life, she was happy, she had a job, didn't have any family problems, but one day she just never came back from work. But also, I just want to add that just because nothing seems wrong with her or her life on the outside doesn't mean she was happy on the inside. I mean, you never really know what people are going through truly, so just want to throw that out there. Anyway, her family had no clue what happened or where she went, and they assumed she got kidnapped or was killed or just died somewhere. That was literally in the story, that she just died somewhere. How casual is that? But anyway, 5 years later, the aunt's brother is in Chicago for a business trip, and while walking down a street, he sees his sister. He calls out her name to make sure it's her, and she turns around and he's like, what the hell? Before bombarding her with a bunch of questions, which she obviously dodges. To clear the air, she invites him to her apartment, apartment, promising to explain everything. They reach the apartment, and before they get started, she says she really needs to buy some cigarettes from across the street because this was all a massive shock for her as well. He lets her go, and then again, she never bloody comes back. Like, what? Like, don't let her go anywhere alone if she has a history of pulling this crap, dude. Like, you had one job to not let her out of your sight, and that's exactly what you did. Chaperone her to the cigarette shop. You don't let her go alone. No. Now at number 2 is the drugs. This just pissed me off so much I can't even tell you. Now this Reddit user shared that he found out that his dad used to drug his mum for years while they were married and then proceeded to rape her when she passed out. Now as soon as the user found that out, he helped his mum divorce him, and now the family has no relationship with the dad whatsoever. But it gets worse. While the user was dating his now wife, she once had some drinks with his dad and just was not waking up. Now she had just turned 21 at the time, so the user just assumed she couldn't handle her alcohol, but after years of knowing her, he realized she can handle her drink very well and she's never been unwakeable. So the user is damn sure his dad drugged his wife and maybe raped her, but he has no proof. This whole story just made me absolutely sick to my stomach. Finally, at number 1 is the secret family. This one blew my mind, but it's actually not as uncommon as you'd think. So this story was shared by an anonymous girl who has 2 brothers and parents who have been married for over 35 years. I remember that detail. Now one year over Christmas, she was doing some family research and found that her dad's name brought up birth results for 2 other people other than her and her siblings. Now the births were registered to the north of England, which was a red flag straight away because her dad used to work in that area for 5 years 20 years prior. So keep in mind, their parents were married by that point. He would go up there for 2 weeks, then be home for 2 weeks, and so forth. Now the girl did some more digging and found the 2 kids on Facebook, and they were now grown women, and their last names were also her dad's last name. Instead of contacting them, since she assumed they didn't know either, she found and contacted their mum. She posed as her dad's relative, and the woman confirmed her dad was the father of her kids and even sent photocopies of their birth certificates. Now the girl ends up calling the woman and confessing she's his daughter as well and had no idea about any of this, and the woman obviously breaks down crying. She shared that they had met in a pub and her dad had told her that he was single, and a few months later they were expecting their first child, and a year later the second. She thought he went back to Wales every 2 weeks for work, but he would call every other day from a phone box because apparently he didn't own a landline. Already shady, so many red flags. Who doesn't own a landline? Come on now. And one day he went back to Wales for work and just straight up never came back. The woman tried to contact the company he worked for, but his contract was up, so he didn't work there anymore. And since he had lied about where he lived in Wales, the woman couldn't find him either. So the girl's dad just left this woman with 2 kids and literally did the biggest case boy ghosting I've ever seen. Like, I thought I got ghosted bad, like this is horrible. The girl didn't even have the heart to confront her dad or tell her mum about the other 2 kids. Oh my god, I don't even know what I would do if I found that out. First of all, I would tell everyone. Would I? That's a secret that would ruin a family for sure. Oh, but the truth has to come out, you guys. Starting us off with number 10 is the deceit. Well, to be fair, all of these are deceitful in one way or another since they're secrets. So this one was shared by an anonymous person who said when he was 16 years old, he thought he had the perfect family life. Despite having a bunch of step and half siblings, he had a great time. But one day he came home to find his dad waiting outside with all his stuff in the car. When the person got out of the car, their dad was just like, "Hey, I cheated on your mother, I have to leave. See you later, son." Can you imagine? See you later, son. Like, how nonchalant. The boy went inside to find all of his dad's stuff gone. He looked through his drawers to find joints and weed pipes, despite raising the kids Pentecostal as hell. He found drug baggies, he found alcohol, he found a loaded shotgun, and this all shocked his system because he basically worshipped his dad growing up. Ever since he was 4 years old, his dad would always tell him that he was the only reason he was still here, and the boy assumed if he was a good boy, his dad would never leave. Turns out the dad didn't leave because he cheated. I mean, he did cheat, but the mum had forgiven him for that. He had actually been molesting the boy's sister since she was 10 years old, and she only came out about it when she was 18, and then he chose to leave. The mum didn't even leave him. The boy felt like for wanting this monster to stick around so bad all these years and not knowing what was happening behind the scenes. Coming in at number 9 is Uncle Jeff. Jeff, spelt with a G-E-O. Now this story comes from Redditor Garbage Axe, and before I get into it, I just want to say that any Jeff that's spelt with G-E-O instead of J is just problematic, and I also want to say Joff. The one in the story is screwed up, and I got a body composition assessment done at my gym by a G-E-O Jeff, and he said I had to lose 12 pounds, and I've been sad ever since. So we hate Joffs. Geoffs. damn you, Joff. Anyway, the user shared that this uncle was another level screwed up. He was the town's police chief, so he could kind of get away with everything and anything. So with that being said, he got super high one day and then killed his best friend. I don't know why or how, but his only punishment was a slap on the wrist. And that's not all. Good old Uncle Jeff also used to sell, or rather pimp out his daughters to men for drug money. Thankfully, his wife divorced him and took the girls, but then both of them got pregnant by their stepdad, who is also a preacher. Like, the story just doesn't end well for anyone. No one is having a happy ending. At number 8, we have Nazis. Yup, this is a thing. This is a thing. So this one was shared by an anonymous person who said the family of the woman he married was just a bit off. Now, she always said she didn't know where her ancestors came from, she didn't know where her last name came from, her parents had blue eyes and platinum blonde hair but had Latino accents. It just didn't make sense. Turns out their first language is Portuguese and they were from Brazil, or so he thought. A year later, she broke down and told him her grandparents were actually hardcore Nazis that left just before the war ended. The guy didn't care and said he still loved her and she was glad he took it well. She then insisted he meet her family in Brazil, and so they planned a trip. When they first got to the colony, it was already just weird as hell. Everyone spoke Portuguese as expected, but they also spoke German. The grandparents themselves weren't really different from the locals except obviously for how they looked, but the colony was very isolated. The people there had a hatred towards anyone who was different to them, i.e. Jews. The wife's great uncle had a Hitler mustache as well, for God's sake. Like, this is just not a good vibe. The last thing the grandparents said to the man was that he needed to understand what they were planning, and the fact that the colony wasn't a retirement home for the Nazi lifestyle, it was a catalyst and incubator. Are they planning a Nazi comeback? Like, that's not gonna happen. Sorry, not sorry. Sorry to crush your dreams. Filling on number 7 slot is the email. Another one shared by an anonymous person who said they have a sister and a half brother who's 14 years older than them, and the brother basically has the same mum, different fathers. Now, a few months ago, the person's aunt, as in the mum's sister, sent a giant email to the whole family venting 60 years of hatred towards the mum in it. She ended it with revealing the person's mum had had another kid that no one knew about because she had given it up for adoption. And obviously no one in the family knew about this. The person ended up confronting their mum about it, who said the father of this kid was his half-brother's dad. They weren't married when she got pregnant, so she gave the baby up, but then eventually they did end up getting married and having the person's half-brother. Obviously they got divorced some years later, the mum ended up marrying the person's dad. Either way, the worst part of this revelation was that after the aunt sent the email, she had actually doused herself in gasoline, tied herself to a pole in her garden, and lit herself on fire. Now at number 6 is the Justice. This man shared that after his first combat tour, he got super drunk with his dad, who was also a combat vet during the Vietnam War. They were in a very deep discussion about killing someone and the feelings that overcome you when you've done it, and then he kinda slipped up and revealed a shocking piece of information. He revealed that the boy's mom had been sexually assaulted after they got married and carried the child to full term, not knowing that that child was his older sister the whole time, as in the person's older sister. But the dad was not gonna take that lightly. He had just been discharged but was still in the Camp Pendleton area, so he gathered a group of guys from his unit and kidnapped the rapist. He took him out in the middle of nowhere, sexually assaulted him, killed him, and then threw him into a ravine. Coming in at number 5 is a story from the past, and I feel like this won't hit that hard because it happened so long ago, like back in 1904, but I still thought it was pretty crazy. Shared by Redditor Kimchi Gimchi, they said that their great-great-great-grandparents immigrated from Prussia to the US. On the way there, one of their 5 sons came down with tuberculosis, and they were so scared that that would jeopardize their chances of getting the whole family into the States that they straight up threw him overboard. They assumed he wouldn't survive the whole journey anyway, so they literally just killed him. I can't even imagine that even being an option for someone, especially a mum. Like, our son has TB, should we just off him? Like, what? I don't even know how they went through with it, I really don't. At number 4 is the stolen child, ? Now this one's from Reddit user Fudget Bucket, who shared their mum is not their real mum. Apparently their real mother died from a drug overdose when they were 6 weeks old. The baby was only found when a random man came round to the house to collect money from the mum, and he ended up just taking the baby. His girlfriend was furious at him for just taking the child, but after a bunch of undisclosed time where I don't know what happened, somehow the user's mum ended up with them. Apparently the mum went home to Arizona after a year claiming she got pregnant traveling and didn't know who the dad was. And at first I didn't really think this was such a big story, but then the Redditors commenting on the post started speculating that the user could easily be a missing kid or a stolen child, and I was like, wow, that adds a whole nother layer to this that I did not even think about, but also very messed up. Filling at number 3 slot are sides. Now this one comes from Redditor. This is a throwaway 0915 who shared that her grandmother is her mom, not by birth, but like emotionally and support wise. She adopted her. Apparently the girl's birth mom married a very problematic guy that used to molest her till she was 5 or 6 years old. The user confided in her best friend about it, who told her own parents, who informed her school. Now instead of confronting the husband and divorcing him like anyone would, the birth mom went to the police and claimed the user was lying and threw her in the foster system just so no charges were placed against the guy. Like, what the hell? Why would a 5-year-old lie about that? 5-year-olds don't know what molestation is. There's no reason for them to know what it is unless they're going through it. The birth mom even put a restraining order on this young ass kid, so it's just so messed up. Thankfully the girl's grandma adopted her, but it was still really hard going through school and them calling her mum on file, who did not give a flying about her. And she couldn't have just been like, oh no, my mum is actually my grandma, because she didn't want to explain the whole thing, which I mean obviously who would, it's very traumatic. Now at number 2 is the Black Widow, the dark side of elderly people. So this one was shared by Redditor Philly Cheese, who said there was a rumor in her family that her great grandma was a Black Widow, and that essentially means a female that kills a male after his job is done, like the actual spider, hence the same name. Anyway, the great grandma had 4 husbands and each one died in bizarre mysterious ways. One of them was stabbed to death by the great grandma's brother because apparently the husband was attacking the great grandma and her brother walked in on it and stabbed him to death in self-defense. No charges were ever pressed, and so the murder or the self-defense went unconcluded. Then the user's grandma, aka the great grandma's daughter, completely cut her off and stopped speaking to her mum in 1950 when she was 18. Even when she died in 2014, they never spoke, and I mean that's a long ass time to not speak to your mum, and who even does that unless something serious and horrific happened to prompt it? Thing is, the user got close to her great grandma for the last 10 years of her life before she died, and she was genuinely the sweetest person ever. But she did say at times when she got angry, the user would see this morbid evil in her face and eyes that made her think the rumors were true and that she did in fact kill her husbands. I've never seen a grandma gone bad. But also no one ever suspects like an old person to be committing a crime. They're like, oh, you go net now. And finally, at number 1 is the toxic relationship. This one broke my heart and I was so disturbed by it, I still don't really know how to feel about it, and I've had like 2 hours to sit on it. Shared by Reddit user Rio_speed_dealer, they said their parents were royally messed up. When their dad came back from serving in Vietnam, he became a heavy heroin user as well as an alcoholic. Either way, he met the user's mom soon after, and after a whirlwind romance filled with alcohol and heroin, they got married. Sounds like the perfect love story. Where can I sign up? No, I'm kidding. Can you imagine? Either way, he introduced the mom to heroin, but she wasn't as heavy a user as he was. As you can imagine, the couple fought a lot. One day when the user was 10 months old, the parents were arguing in the garage, and to prove a point to his wife, the dad picked up the user as a baby and threw them headfirst onto the concrete floor. Their skull was not only fractured, a bit of it actually broke away, revealing some brain. The mom got so mad she hit him with a shovel, and then the dad went to his car, got his gun, shot the mum in the face, and then shot himself in the head. The user was lucky to be alive, but thankfully they didn't become a vegetable or suffer from any brain damage. Their aunt and uncle adopted them and gave them a wonderful life afterwards, but can you imagine that? I feel like any story that involves a baby just really breaks my heart. Like I really can't deal with it because I feel like they're so defenseless and it takes a real monster to hurt a baby. Starting us off at number 10 are the 2 families. This one was shared by Redditor Jerk40 and it's just shocking and scandalous. I was like, god damn, how do you get away with that? He shared that his great granddad had 2 separate families that lived at 200 yards apart from each other for 20 whole years, and none of them even knew about the other one at all. They only found out at the guy's funeral because the priest asked the spouse to step forward and both wives did. And I'm sure you can imagine the show that happened after that. I would be so pissed if I was one of the wives. Like, how dare you take that secret to the grave with you? I don't want to know why he hid it, why did he feel the need to marry someone else? Oh, the audacity to have them live on the same street as well. Like, I'm so pissed on these women's behalves. Like, I'm so, you can't. Moving on. It's not my battle. It's not my battle. Coming in at number 9 is the eye. Now this one was shared by a now deleted Reddit user who shared the story about her parents. When she was about 5 years old, her mum decided she no longer wanted to be with her dad anymore, and so she told him. Her dad, having major anger management issues, got really angry and they started having a fight. Her dad grabbed the mum because he was about to hit her, but the user's 7-year-old sister intervened and tried to pull him off her. But as she got close, the dad swung backwards and hit her in the eye with the TV remote and blinded her there and then. The parents ended up telling her that she fell and that's how it happened, and the sister herself was too traumatized to know what happened or even remember it, but the user did remember. The sister got bullied incessantly throughout school and ended up dropping out in 10th grade because of it. Got into drugs and alcoholism all because of this one accident she doesn't even know the truth about. The cherry on top, the sister is extremely close to the dad and she has no idea. I would tell her, what the hell, rip the band-aid right off, tell her. At number 8 we have drugs. Now this was shared by an anonymous person who said her mum is Colombian but moved to the US when she was 12. She had no idea who her family was, but was told many stories over the years from different relatives. The person was also aware that her Italian paternal grandparents had ties to the mob, and through many Google searches she found out that her granddad was actually a snitch and was put into the witness protection program after being implicated in murder, and for being a huge coke dealer. Cause you know, if you're already killing people, what's a bit of drug dealing on the side? It's really not that deep. Curious, the person started researching her maternal side and found out that her other grandparents were leaders of a huge pot smuggling ring in Colombia in the 80s. They were both sentenced to over 250 years in jail each, and after that her trail of Google searches went cold. Rumor has it her maternal granddad died of a heart attack in jail after hearing that his wife had been murdered. So on one side her maternal grandparents were prolific pot smugglers, and on the other Italian paternal side they were murderers and coke dealers. Hopefully the apple fell very far from the tree. Filling on number 7 slot is the revelation. I'd be so mad if I was this boy, I swear down. Shared by an anonymous person as well, he said his parents always just joke around about how they picked up the wrong baby at the hospital. I feel like every kid does this and does it to their siblings. My sisters used to tell me I was adopted the whole time I was growing up. Well, at 17 years old he found out it wasn't as much of a joke as they made it out to be. His parents revealed that around the exact same time he was born, another baby boy had been abandoned by his parents and both kids were the same size. Mix-ups are never meant to happen, but somehow it did, and essentially the staff didn't know which one was the actual son of the user's parents. His mum looked at the babies and swore that he was her kid despite the name tag saying otherwise, and that was that. Genetic tests were super expensive back in the day, so they couldn't do it, and now the user isn't even sure if he's his parents' biological son or not. And he doesn't really care to find out, but he does wonder about the other baby and if he was ever adopted or if he was the real biological son or not. I would so take a test. I'd love to know. Actually, I don't know, that could really break me. That revelation that late in life, I don't know if I could handle that. Now at number 6 is soul. This one was shared by an anonymous person who said that their grandma was the one that knew all the dirty little secrets about the family. She was like the guardian of the galaxy of secrets, should I say? But are my jokes getting worse with every video? I feel like they are. Please tell me in the comments below. Actually no, don't, because I don't want to cry myself to sleep, so just don't do that, thanks. Anyway, aside from my bad joke, one night the grandma was sharing details about her husband's family and how they were very poor growing up. They would live off the streets and were really struggling to make money during Australia's gold rush, so they came up with a very questionable solution. They had a lot of kids but not enough money to support all of them, so they just up and sold one of their kids. Like, that kid would have been the person's grandfather's granduncle had he not been sold off, and the grandma had kept it a secret her entire life. How do you even choose which kid to sell? Like, oh, that one's been pissing me off, let's just sell that one. Or that one eats too much, he's just not financially viable, let's just get rid of that one. Like, how can a mum or a dad choose which kid to sell? I can't even fathom that. It's like, oh Boris, you don't want to do your chores? I'll sell you. I sold Patrick, I'll sell you too. That's exactly what they would have done. Coming in at number 5 is the pedophile, shared by another anonymous person because clearly no one wants to be linked to the dirty secrets they reveal. This person shared that their wife's brother-in-law is a pedophile and had gone to jail for it. He was released after treatment and rehab, and one day when she really had to get groceries, she left her 12 and 4-year-old daughters with this man. Of course he tries to assault the 12-year-old, and when the mum comes back she realizes what a mistake she's made. She then realizes, wait, this 12-year-old cannot tell the police because then social services would just take her kids away for being frickin' incompetent. Which, I mean, they're not wrong. Who the hell leaves their kid with an ex-convicted pedophile? It's literally not rocket science. So the mum convinces the 12-year-old to forget about it, the man faces no consequences, and they just never talk about it again. The pedophile still attends all the family dinners, and every time the 12-year-old girl sees him, mind you she's like 25 now, she has a proper panic attack every time. At number 4 is drug money, shared by Maddie Bell on Reddit. She said that one of her dad's cousins murdered his mum, which would have been the user's grandpa's sister. Apparently the mum wouldn't give her son drug money, so he just snapped and stabbed her to death and then chopped up her body. That tore the whole family apart, which was a huge deal since it was a very tight-knit family beforehand. No one talked about him or the incident after that, and he just recently got out of jail and reached out to the family, which was just very awkward to put it lightly. No one talks to him, no one even acknowledges he exists, but her dad did meet him 3 months ago, but just hasn't told the family about it. I guess we're just adding more skeletons into the closet, I guess. You know what I mean? Why come out of the hole you've dug yourself into when you can just dig it deeper? Maybe it'll just become so deep no one can even see you. Filling at number 3 slot is the secret brother. Now this one was shared by an anonymous person who said it took her dad 17 years to admit that he had fathered another kid before she was born. He had had a kid with someone that wasn't her mom, and every single person in her family knew about it other than her. Her estranged brother was raised by his mom alone, and her dad didn't even meet him till he was 13 years old. The user's parents had come to an agreement that if he had nothing to do with the other woman or the son, that they could make their marriage work. It was kept so under wraps to the point that when she visited her grandparents, they would hide pictures of her brother so she'd never find out. And I mean, it worked, but when she did find out, she went through this depressive, guilty phase about being the kid that her dad chose rather than her brother. I'd be so pissed off. If I was an only child, I'd love to have a sibling, and having a sibling and not knowing about it would just annoy me even more. Now at number 2 is the real reason. This one was shared by Reddit user FFSend_513, who said her sister died 3 years ago. She took care of the whole thing and preserved her image and memory by telling their parents she had passed out in the bath and had drowned. But of course, that's not what happened at all. The user actually found her sister slumped forward and dead in the bathtub because she had passed out after shooting up heroin. If I found my sister's dead body like that, I don't think I'd ever get over it. Like, they're my best friends in the whole world. I don't even know how I'd go on, so my heart literally breaks for this user that she had to go through this. Like that, I don't even know. And finally, at number 1 is abandonment. This one broke my heart and was shared by possum_alert on Reddit. They said that their great-grand-aunt had a son out of wedlock with a man who was already married to someone else. A few years later, she got married herself, but her husband refused to take care of and raise another man's child, and so he refused to let the child even live in his house. How cruel is that? Like, it wasn't the kid's fault. So the couple drove somewhere in the middle of the night and just abandoned this 3 or 4-year-old kid on the side of the road and just drove off. Honestly, like, at first the story didn't hit me as hard as it did after I really thought about it. Like, imagine this poor little boy who literally doesn't even know how to fend for himself being left on the road in the middle of the night. Like, how long did he wait for his parents to come back and get him? Did he make it even, or did he die? Was he just going around saying, I don't know where my parents went? Like, this actually broke my heart. Like, and why at night? Night is so dangerous. Like, why? Oh, like, I'm really sad for this kid, and I hope you're doing so well, wherever you are.
Starting off this dark list, and at number 10, we have the secret farmhouse. A 25-year-old man escaped from a farmhouse and ran to the nearest public place, which happened to be a bar. He guzzled down 5 beers, and then he asked the bartender for help. He told him that he hasn't been outside for 9 years, and he's not the only one. Dutch police were called to the scene, where they found a secret staircase behind a cupboard that led them down to the basement. Inside this secret room, they found a man and his 6 children living inside of a small confined space. Some of these kids had no idea that the other people existed. They thought that they were the only ones left on Earth, and they were waiting for the world to end. But as it turns out, someone in their family was keeping them locked up in this secret farmhouse for 9 years. Is this real life right now? The police were unable to find their mother, and they suspect that she was either the one that did this or that she is dead somewhere. An unknown uncle in prison is at number 9. This scary family secret comes from Reddit. Apparently this person had an uncle in prison, but no one in her family ever told her what he was serving time for. The family never talked about him, and if he was brought up in conversation, everyone would just simply change the topic. But one night, she was watching a TV documentary about horrific crimes that happened in Perth, Australia. And guess what? One of them was about David and Catherine Burney and how they brutally murdered a call girl. Well, as it turns out, this guy had the exact same name as her uncle in prison. Could this be the same guy? Could this be your uncle? Well, she turned to her mom, who said, "So I guess you could put the two together." Well, I guess that's one way to find out that you have an uncle who murdered someone. Not the best way of finding out, but yeah. The murderous couple is in at number 8. Gerald and Alice Uden appear to be the most wholesome couple. They regularly attended church and they seem to be super nice, genuine. They're very generous people. Well, don't be fooled by them because both of them were hiding their own deep, dark secret for decades. Apparently they were both married to other people they met before. Alice shot her husband in the head and then decided to hide his body in a gold mine. Whereas Gerald confessed to shooting his ex-wife and stepchildren with a rifle that she had bought him as a present. I mean, is this real life right now? What are the odds of these two people finding each other? Did they meet at a Killed My Spouse group meeting, or maybe they swiped right on the Kill Me app or I've Killed Before app? It's also crazy how many years went by before they were finally caught by the police. This story is absolutely insane. Next up on our list, at number 7, antifreeze. A mother and daughter confessed to poisoning members of their family with antifreeze. Let me give you guys a quick backstory. The father died without warning, so they attributed it to natural causes. Well, 5 months later, her autistic son died from what seemed to be seizure-related complications. And then the following year after that, her daughter needed emergency medical attention, and this is for an organ failure. Yeah, something about this just doesn't seem right. The family's pastor thought so too, so he reached out to local law enforcement who were able to get a confession out of her. And her motives were pretty messed up. She wanted her husband gone because of his temper. She couldn't deal with her autistic son, and her daughter racked up too much debt from college. So she had to go as well. She was gonna keep her other 2 daughters because she so loved them. But get this, the police found a diary belonging to her youngest daughter, and she wrote about how she helped her mother plan and execute the murders, and her goal was to eliminate the entire family until it was just her and her mother left. I mean, I can't even deal with this messed up family, so let's move on. The closet child comes in at number 6. For 3 years, a young boy was hidden inside of a locked closet while he was sedated by sleeping pills given to him by his mother. When neighbors asked Veronica Aguilar where her son was, she told them that he was placed in an institution in Mexico. But her 3 other children who slept on a bed just outside of the closet door knew the truth, but they were forbidden by their mother from saying anything to anyone. Sadly, this little boy's life came to an end when police finally discovered his malnourished body inside of the closet. It's insane because so many people like teachers, social workers, therapists, they all knew that he was a victim of abuse, but somehow they lost track of him, and because of their carelessness, his mother was able to lock him inside of a closet for a very long time until he ultimately passed away. Number 5, we have a crazy story about a girl who was raised by a man who killed her parents. Victoria Montenegro thought that her adoptive parents were kind and generous people who took her in after her real parents were killed in a shootout in Buenos Aires in 1976. Well, as it turns out, that was a complete lie. When she turned 24 years old, she discovered that the couple who raised her was part of the military regime responsible for her parents' disappearance. Her birth parents were actually abducted, abused, and assassinated by this group when she was only 4 months old. So her adoptive father took this opportunity to falsify her documents, hide her identity, and raise her as his own. This is just so messed up, so twisted. All of these years, she was being raised by a family that actually killed her parents and stole her identity. A serial killer in hiding brings us to number 4. Back in 1971, 13-year-old Charlie Brandt went into a full homicidal rampage. Without any warning, he shot his father in the back and then shot his pregnant mother while she was in the bath. He went to kill his other sister, but luckily his gun jammed. His father barely survived the shooting, but his mother wasn't so lucky. But because of his age, prosecutors never charged him with his mother's death. He was able to walk free and live a normal life. His family never brought up that night ever again, and he just went on as nothing ever happened. Well, in 2004, Brandt went on to brutally stab his wife 7 times in the chest, and he even decapitated her and ripped her heart out. Afterwards, he committed suicide. It's crazy because no one knew that he had serial killer tendencies except for his family, who kept his secret after all of these years. Now at number 3, dead bodies in the garage. Darren West spent 10 years of his life thinking that he only had 3 children with his ex-wife. But in 2006, this reality was shattered. He was serving time in prison for drug charges, but he was being released. While he was making arrangements to stay with his ex-wife, he came to the shocking truth. He found a dead baby in her garage, and it wasn't the only one. Between 1996 and 2006, Megan Huntsman had secretly given birth to 7 babies, and she choked them all to death. She turned her garage into a makeshift graveyard and kept this family's secret for years. As it turns out, she was addicted to meth, and that was her motive for killing these poor kids. I just can't believe that she was able to hide her pregnancy and murders this whole time. She probably would have taken this dark secret to her grave. The Turpin children makes its way onto this list at number 2. David and Louise Turpin managed to abuse their 13 children for years until one daughter was able to escape and tell the police. These poor kids were in such a controlling and abusive environment and had to do whatever it took to survive. In the media, their house was being called a house of horrors because some of the children were so far removed from the world. I mean, they didn't even know what medicine or the police were until they were finally rescued. They were only fed once a day and given a shower once a year. No one in the neighborhood had any idea what was going on inside of that house, and the parents managed to get away with this for a very long time. They're able to get away with their dark secret for many, many years. Now at number 1, we have a girl who was held captive for 24 years. This next story is a pretty famous case that emerged back in 2008. A woman named Elizabeth Fritzl, well, she told police that she had been captive for the past 24 years by her own father. Joseph Fritzl had assaulted, abused, and hurt her numerous times during her, imprisonment inside of her family basement. His abuse resulted in the birth of 7 children, where 3 of them remained in captivity with Elizabeth. One of them died shortly after birth, and Joseph disposed of his body in an incinerator, and the other 3 were brought up by him and his wife as their own. This secret went on for 24 years until finally the police discovered what was really going on. The story is so much more messed up, but I definitely don't want to get into all the horrific details. All I know is that Elizabeth is finally free, and I hope that one day she'll be able to move past this. I feel so bad.
Starting off this list, in our number 10 spot, we have Let's Celebrate. Okay, so this story is one wild ride, and it is honestly actually pretty terrifying. One night, a young woman was coming home late after she had been out having a few alcoholic beverages. Her creepy neighbor unfortunately witnessed this and for some reason decided to head to her front door with her. Her birthday had recently passed, and so when her weird neighbor tried to give her a hug, she just assumed it was him trying to be nice, but things quickly got even more strange. As she was trying to get into her own home, he kept insisting he should come in and have a drink with her so that they could celebrate more appropriately. Absolutely not. This woman was thinking quick because she decided to tell him that she couldn't find her keys, and then she quickly pulled out her phone and she said she was calling someone who might have them. She was actually calling her cousin though, and she told him how scared she was. He lived close by, so he jumped out of bed and drove really quickly to come and pick her up. I wish this was the end of the story, but she explains that shortly after this creepy night, her neighbor actually ended up poisoning one of her dogs just out of pure pettiness. That is so insane. In our number 9 spot today, we have the upstairs neighbor. Before I dive into this one, guys, please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you're enjoying the video so far, because it really helps us out. This story comes from someone who explains that they live in an apartment building. Their neighbors directly above them are the ones having some extremely fishy behavior. Apparently, it is not abnormal to hear this couple screaming and arguing with each other, which is quite a thing to have to get used to. But here's where things turn sinister. Our storyteller explains that she hasn't seen the wife for at least 3 months now, which obviously isn't normal. And now, suddenly, the husband says that he's going to Malaysia for a while, but our storyteller feels like he's going forever, considering he is also selling his apartment. And we still don't know where the wife is. I'm hoping that maybe they just decided to separate since they were obviously arguing all the time, and that nothing more sinister is going on here. If I was their neighbor, I'm sure my mind would definitely be racing as well, though. In our number 8 spot today, we have this suspicious behavior. This story starts off with a description of the family next door. There are 3 of them, a husband, a wife, and their 2-year-old daughter. Apparently the husband has always been super weird and gave off some bad feelings. He had a really expensive car and apparently basically all he did was drive it and wash it. So, one day, the police came knocking on our storyteller's door, and the police explained that apparently the husband and wife next door had supposedly gotten a divorce, but they wanted to know if they happened to know the whereabouts of the wife and daughter because they could not locate them. Our storyteller didn't know anything about their whereabouts, but gave what info she did know, which was that she had a 2-year-old and that she was maybe pregnant and that she drove a white Jeep. After this police visit, they didn't hear anything else, but of course kept their eyes and ears peeled. A few months after the police visit, the creepy husband is outside cleaning his expensive car, and this is when our storyteller sees the wife's white Jeep in the garage of the house. If she had run off, why would she leave her car? The creepy husband saw our storyteller see the Jeep, and just a few short days later, he ended up selling it. This could all just be a coincidence, but it certainly is all a little suspicious. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Skull Stealer. This next story is one that our storyteller luckily didn't have to witness, but it definitely is still quite strange. Apparently this neighbor man was out and about searching for gold one day, and on his way back he ended up being pulled over for some reason. The police ended up searching this man's car when they found something I don't think anyone was expecting. They found a real human skull. Sinister or not, why would you ever have something like that in the back of your car? This guy's excuse is that he found it while he was out searching and thought it belonged to an Indigenous American. This man was most definitely arrested, and unfortunately our storyteller doesn't know how the rest of this story panned out, but if it wasn't already clear, if you ever find a human skull, please don't take it home with you. In our number 6 spot today, we have Always Watching. This story is about the family that lived across the street from our storyteller when they were in high school. Our storyteller would walk to and from school every day, and while the mornings were normal, when he was coming home every day is when things got very weird. This family across the street would sit and stare out the window at this guy every single day as he returned from school. I couldn't imagine this happening to me once, let alone every single day, but that truly sounds like an absolute nightmare. To make things just a little more strange, it apparently wasn't uncommon for them to get phone calls from their scary neighbors' phone numbers, but when they answered, there just wasn't anyone on the other end. I feel like I would have immediately put my house up for sale or something, because every night I would feel like I would need to sleep with one eye open. In our number 5 spot today, we have Stay Away. This story comes from someone who had some weird neighbors when they were around 9 or 10 years old. The people who actually lived next door were a middle-aged couple, and while they didn't have any kids of their own, they had 3 nieces who were around the same age as him, so they would play together often. One day the couple invited our storyteller to church with them. There isn't necessarily anything inherently wrong with that, but what happens next is where things turned a little strange. This couple then proceeded to explain why this child should come to church with them, which already sounds creepy. They began to explain that the world was about to end and that they were preparing for that. These fully grown adults literally told the child that if he wanted to live, he should go to church with them. I have a strong feeling that if he wanted to live, the best thing to do would be to absolutely not go to church with them under any circumstances. Who knows what church they were going to, but there's no way it was good. In our number 4 spot today, we have This Dangerous Fence. This story comes from someone from a family with 4 siblings for a total of 5 kids. They were all pretty rambunctious and unfortunately had the pleasure of living next to a family with 2 children, both of which were, of course, very well behaved. Obviously, the neighbor dad didn't take too kindly to living next door to a bunch of wild children, considering he had 2 perfect little angels. But he certainly took things way too far. One day our storyteller was climbing around on the fence that separated the 2 properties, and this set off the neighbor dad. Instead of doing literally anything normal, he decided to do one of the most messed up things he could. He took those nails that are used for carpets to grip the flooring and stuck them in bars of wood, which he then placed on top of the fence. Keep in mind that our storyteller is around 5 years old at this time. So every time he would try to climb to the top, he would be stuck by a nail, which would then cause him to fall off. Luckily, our storyteller never got seriously injured or anything from this, but how weird is it for the neighbor dad to react like that? In our number 3 spot today, we have The Rose Garden. This story comes from someone's aunt and is about a neighbor she had in the 70s and 80s. This neighbor was harmless but had quite a creepy pastime. This neighbor volunteered at a blood bank, which is obviously great, but since the 70s and 80s were pretty much just a free-for-all, there was an insane blood bank rule that allowed this neighbor lady to be able to take home the bags of blood that were expired and would be thrown out. I truly cannot believe that was a thing, but I guess this lady was resourceful. She would take these bags of blood and then use them as fertilizer for her garden. Our storyteller's aunt explains that you would see her out there on her knees, digging around with a big floppy sun hat, just working human blood into the soil around her roses. They end off this story by explaining that all of the flowers in her garden were truly magnificent, and I guess maybe she really was onto something. In our number 2 spot today, we have the next door dentist. This story comes from someone whose neighbor was a dentist, and he lived with his wife, and they apparently had one creepy child. Our storyteller explains that this weird family next door once absolutely freaked out on them for planting some flowers alongside their fence. They didn't go into detail about why, but the dentist family screamed as they said they didn't want anyone digging up their land. That's a reasonable request for sure, but also very, very suspicious. The dentist family ended up moving out 2 years after this strange incident, and our storyteller didn't really think much of them until 3 years after that. In an absolutely wild but not surprising turn of events, the dentist's dad ended up being arrested for kidnapping his patients. Our storyteller still has never had confirmation, but truly believes that there are still bodies located down there. In our number 1 spot today, we have Peeping Tom. Okay, so this one is truly one of the creepiest things I have ever heard. This story comes from a man who lives with his wife, and they have a downstairs neighbor who is certainly something else. First, this creepy neighbor approaches the wife and says to her that he can hear her and her husband all the time, with a super creepy and sinister grin on his face, which is absolutely horrifying to even think of. This is already creepy, but this story unfortunately gets worse. One day the wife was painting the porch of the house and accidentally dropped a paintbrush. She bent down to pick it up and sadly had to see what no one should have to see. Through the slits in the deck, she saw this creepy neighbor's eyes staring up at her. Tell me why this creepy man was laying under the porch, staring up at her, being a weirdo Peeping Tom. They have no idea how long he was there for, and honestly, they probably don't even want to know.
Coming in at number 10, we have this tie-dye dream. This family not only makes this list for the sheer awkwardness of this situation, but they also win the award for the most horrifyingly coordinated family in the world. I can't tell whether it's Christmas or whether this kid simply wants to express some individuality. I'm also not 100% understanding the family dynamic here either. Also, I want to be able to read what's embroidered on their shirts, but I can't quite. I think it says "We be mummy," which actually is awkward in a whole new kind of place. Coming in at number 9, we have this family who look like they may or may not have contracted the plague. Why are they so purple? I'm really confused. Absolutely nobody in this family picture wants to be here. No one. The 2 boys look like they're suffering a high fever and they're about to vomit, and the grandma looks like she's just seen Phil Mitchell resurface at the old Vic and she's about to go give him a piece of her mind, and she's taking the baby for backup. And then we have the mum who's looking sideways into an alternative reality where she just doesn't have to deal with this kind of BS. Okay, coming into number 8, I kind of have no idea what to say about whatever the F is happening in these 2 family portraits, other than, no, I still have nothing to say. What is going on? I really am out of words. I guess these 2 ethereal godlike dudes take their job as head of the family very seriously. They really do embody the white middle class male of the 1980s. What a golden era. Also, why so serious? Here we are at number 7, and things are getting pretty naked. Nudity can be great, but around your family, I mean, it's just all kinds of mentally scarring. Does anyone actually have any idea what the dynamic is here? Having your breasts cupped by one man whilst another holds your naked, bulging, pregnant belly, I mean, I've got some questions. Who does this baby belong to? I'm with the kid and his toy turkey. I just want to stay well away from this one. More nudity coming in at number 6. Hip hip hooray. Mummy, why isn't Daddy in the photo? Oh, well he will be in a minute. Just keep, looking forward. Like, at what point does Dad need to adopt the naked man pose? Without this Rudy nudie in the background, I'm thinking this probably could have been a nice picture, but Dad,
put it away. Coming into number 5, we have a full-on back tattoo. This dude could pose for a family portrait all by himself, as he has the faces of his wife and 2 kids tattooed to scale on his back. Wow. Better not have any more kids though, as I don't think there's actually any space for them to join in the ink portrait. So I'm guessing that that's Lisa at the back, and then Zadie on the right, and little Nutella on the left? I wonder if they all have a huge tattoo of him on their back in return. This is so creepy. At number 4, we have a pretty awkward PDA. Grandma, Grandpa, can you just, stop it? As if putting these matching outfits on weren't embarrassing enough, we have to deal with Grandpa's weird pensioner leg flexibility and the full-on pash happening with Grandma. A family who have clearly been taking fashion tips from our family at number 4. Coming in at number 3, we have a serious dose of double denim. Only in North America do we see this kind of scene. So many questions. Why the Canadian tuxedo? And why is everyone bundling on Dad? How is he not getting crushed by his 4 fully grown kids? This picture, seriously. I have to say though, wherever they are, it looks amazing. Coming in at number 2, we have a family that clearly took inspiration from our family before, but took it to a whole new extra level. Hello, Rainbow family. This picture actually gets more awkward from the bottom up. Okay, the kid in the purple looks pretty cute and is definitely having fun. Then the kid in the blue is still kind of down with it all, but the kid in the green is closing her eyes and just wishing that they could be uninvited from their own family life. Then at the very top, what is happening with the dad? This is a whole new level of nope. But it does make me chuckle. Finally, coming in at number 1, this family certainly wants you to be their guest. Yes, yes they do. The low-budget Beast costume is killing me. I love it, it's so good. Those fangs, what? Also, the mum is Mrs. Potts and one of the kids is Belle. What kind of twisted family is this? You know, Beast and Belle are together, right? I am all about the Lumiere pose. I'm thinking that this person is like a zany aunt, the person who probably came up with this whole concept in the first place. Then we have Cogsworth and Chip, and they're kinda cute. I would say overall, A for effort, A+++ for cringe.